drawn and redrawn, the making of India's internal boundaries.
Hi, and welcome back to India's State Stories, a project that explores the evolution of India's political and administrative boundaries. This project is supported by the Center for Legislative Education and Research, Flame University, Pune.
In the last few episodes, we looked at the integration of princely states that were merged into their respective provinces and formed the Part A states. Now, we turn towards Part B states, that is, the states grouped together to form a viable union and were governed by a Raj Pramukh, a new constitutional position held by a former ruler of a state and appointed by the President of India. Along with these unions, some major states like Hyderabad, Jammu and Kashmir and Mysore state were also categorized into Part B states and governed in the similar manner by the Raj Pramukh. Let's dive into the fascinating history of formations of these unions and explore their individual stories in the following 9 episodes. Listen to the first 3 episodes of Season 2 to understand a deeper context. These episodes give an overview of the entire process of integration, along with an introduction to the legal instruments and some key personalities which made it possible. More details are in the show notes below, and let's dive in.
We're taking a deep dive into how 2 particularly progressive princely states, Travancore and Cochin, navigated the very tricky waters of Indian independence. Our mission: to explore the intricate political chess game, the compelling personalities involved, and the frankly surprising compromises that led to one of India's most significant acts of political consolidation. You're definitely about to uncover some genuinely eye-opening stuff.
Absolutely. And it's a story that really highlights the massive challenges any new nation faces, right? When India gained independence, it wasn't just about provinces, it was about integrating hundreds, literally hundreds of princely states, each with its own history, its own culture, and, its own ambitions. Travancore and Cochin, they weren't just 2 more dots on the map. These were states known for being quite forward-thinking, with strong, unique identities. So this deep dive will cover everything from their ancient roots and pioneering reforms, right through to intense personal rivalries, even a dramatic assassination attempt, and the really meticulous financial negotiations that finally secured their place in the Union.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. Picture yourself way down at the southernmost tip of the Indian peninsula, a region, famous for its lush landscapes, vibrant culture. And here you had the princely states of Travancore and Cochin, often seen as shining examples of administrative progress. They weren't just beautiful, they had incredibly high literacy rates, remarkably modern governance for that era.
That's exactly right. And both states had these incredibly rich, deep historical roots. Travancore, for instance, traced its ruling family back to the ancient Chera kings. The state itself was formally dedicated to Sri Padmanabha, their main deity. Maharajas actually ruled as dasas, or servants of this deity, which gave them a unique sense of duty, you could say. Cochin, too, had roots stretching way back to figures like Chairman Perumal. So we're talking centuries of established tradition here.
And they weren't just existing in a vacuum, right? They had long, complicated relationships with the British.
Definitely. Cochin formed an alliance with the English East India Company back in 1791, became a tributary state.
A tributary, okay.
And Travancore followed in 1805, establishing even closer ties with what they called the paramount power, basically the British Crown's overarching authority.
But what's really striking, you mentioned their progressiveness. How did they manage that under British oversight?
Well, that's what's fascinating. Under this paramountcy, they became genuine pioneers of reform. Cochin, for example, was the very first Indian state to separate its judiciary from the executive. That's a huge step for good governance, something modern nations still work on.
Wow.
Yeah. And by 1925, Cochin had a legislative council with an elected majority. They even sent elected representatives to India's Constituent Assembly in 1946. That shows a real commitment to democratic ideas. And both states, Travancore and Cochin, poured significant money into public education literacy. They actively pushed for industrialization, too. This wasn't just, local stuff. They were arguably operating at a level of governance and social welfare that could rival many independent nations at the time.
That's quite a record. So it makes you wonder then, how did these advanced states with such strong identities grapple with joining a whole new nation? Because this is where the story gets really interesting, doesn't it? After the huge announcement of India's partition in 1947, the Diwan of Travancore, a guy called C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, he made this bold, very controversial declaration. Travancore intended to be independent.
Exactly. And that immediately sent shockwaves across the new Indian leadership, sparked real fears of what people call the balkanization of India.
Fragmentation.
Right. Breaking up into lots of small, maybe unviable states. Travancore had considerable income from customs duties, you see. So its leadership felt, perhaps genuinely, that they could go it alone. And their stance was also, well, partly influenced by the Nawab of Hyderabad making similar noises. There was a fear of a domino effect. But the Indian National Congress pushed back hard. They argued that just because British paramountcy ended, it didn't automatically give states the right to declare independence.
So a real standoff. Huge stakes for India's unity. And into this pressure cooker situation, step 2, key figures. Lord Mountbatten, the Crown representative, tasked with negotiating these accessions. A tough job. And alongside him, VP Menon, the Secretary of the State's Department, he turned out to be absolutely crucial, didn't he?
Absolutely pivotal. The challenge wasn't just persuading rulers, it was figuring out how.
Yeah.
How do you weave these diverse, often proud independent states with their own histories, sometimes clashing ambitions? How do you weave them into one unified nation without causing more fragmentation? It was an immense diplomatic tightrope walk.
Okay, so given they were so advanced, so independent-minded, what were the really stubborn practical problems hindering Travancore and Cochin joining up? Because it wasn't just politics, right? It was real-world stuff.
Exactly. It was a real knotted web, as the sources put it, full of old grudges and practical headaches. One huge issue was geographical fragmentation. Just imagine trying to run a state where parts of Cochin, including its capital Ernakulam, were literally islands surrounded entirely by Travancore territory.
Wow, that sounds impossible.
It created huge practical problems for basic administration, policing, infrastructure, everything. Then you had resource disputes. Ernakulam needed its water supply from Travancore. Many important rivers flowed through both states. But these old rivalries were so deep-seated that they just couldn't reach satisfactory agreements on sharing resources.
So just basic cooperation was failing.
Pretty much. Even law and order suffered. The different jurisdictions made it really hard to coordinate efforts against criminals and antisocial elements.
Yeah.
And religious properties were another flashpoint. The administration of Devaswam's temple endowments and how funds were allocated for temple upkeep. These were super contentious issues, tied up with local identity and power.
Okay, that's a lot of practical stuff. What about the personal side, the rulers?
Yes. That was maybe the most challenging. Relations between the two rulers had apparently been, and I quote, anything but cordial for decades. They weren't even on visiting terms.
Really? Not even visiting?
Apparently not. And the Maharaja of Travancore, at least initially, actually preferred things as they were. He was worried that integration would sort of dilute his state's importance and maybe his own position compared to the Cochin ruler. And then, to complicate things even more, you had the Travancore Tamil Nadu Congress. They represented a big minority group. They were hostile to integrating with Cochin. They feared it would weaken their own political standing. What they wanted was for the Tamil majority areas to merge with Madras province instead.
Good grief. That sounds like an almost impossible list of problems. How on earth did VP Menon even start to untangle that mess?
Menon's approach was, well, remarkably clever. He made it very clear to C.P. Ramaswamy IR that the accession plan was based strictly on the Government of India Act of 1935. Now, this was key. It meant accession was only required on 3 specific, limited subjects: defense, external affairs, and communications.
So limited integration. Keep control over most things.
Exactly. Yeah. And crucially, Menon stressed that this plan did not impose any extra financial burdens or other commitments on Travancore. He was essentially saying, look, you keep significant autonomy.
Okay, that makes sense. But what else did he use to try and persuade IR, especially with all the political turmoil around?
Well, Menon painted a very clear picture of the risks of going it alone, political isolation in this very uncertain post-colonial world. He really hammered home the need for an integrated economic and political system to counter threats, both internal and external. He specifically mentioned the rising communist influence in the region as a major concern.
Right, the stability argument. Yet even with these arguments and the limited scope, Sir C.P. Ramaswamy IR still dug his heels in. He preferred just an agreement, not full accession. He was sticking to independence. Looked like a deadlock.
It really did. Until July 1947. Then something truly dramatic happened that just completely changed the game. C.P. Ramaswamy IR was attacked, brutally stabbed by a member of some political extremist group during a music concert right there in the state.
Oh my God, an assassination attempt.
Yes. And this wasn't just a physical attack. It created this profound political and psychological turning point. not just for IR, but for the whole Travancore government.
You can imagine. So connecting the dots, this incident must have really shaken their resolve, made them rethink independence.
Profoundly. Amidst all the mounting internal pressure, the protests, and this external pressure from Delhi, the attack just crystallized the risks. The Travancore government's attitude towards accession shifted rapidly after that. It became clear that the price of complete independence might just be too high, too dangerous.
So the attack inadvertently broke the deadlock?
In a way, yes. Shortly after IR started recovering, he communicated Travancore's new willingness to accede. Lord Mountbatten, sensing the shift, moved quickly, emphasizing the strategic upsides and, frankly, the inevitability of joining India.
And the Maharaja.
He fell in line. The Maharaja of Travancore telegraphed his acceptance of both the instrument of accession and the standstill agreement in August 1947. And this decision, coming from such a major, previously resistant state like Travancore, it had a huge ripple effect. It really encouraged other wavering rulers across India to sign up too. The instrument itself, the document, was very carefully drafted. Accession on just those three subjects, defense, external affairs, communications, defined exactly as laid out in that specific schedule of the 1935 Act. A detailed legal blueprint for this limited form of integration.
Okay, so accession is secured. The immediate threat of, these two states breaking away is gone. But that was just step one. What about all those incredibly tangled issues we talked about earlier? The geography, the rivalries, the temples. How did accession start solving those?
Well, the very act of accession, of agreeing to form a union, started untangling a lot of it. That geographical fragmentation problem, inherently resolved once they became a single administrative unit. The new union was one contiguous territory. Suddenly, administration became much simpler.
Right, no more islands.
Exactly. And those interstate rivalries.
Yeah.
Unification under one government basically eliminated them, at least officially. It opened the door for coordinated development, managing those shared rivers, and so on. There was even a proposal for a new railway line between Ernakulam and Quillan, a real symbol of this new unity.
And the Devaswams, the temple funds, that sounded really tricky.
It was. But the covenant, the agreement, included a specific, quite nuanced arrangement. They set up dedicated Devaswam boards in each area. The Maharaja kept control over the religious rituals and the temple administration itself, which was important for tradition. But the finances and broader management were now under a board structure, a delicate balance.
Okay, balancing tradition and new governance. And what about the rulers themselves? You said they weren't even talking.
Right. This required a major concession. The Maharaja of Travancore was made the permanent head of the new union. He became the Raj Pramukh for life.
For life. That's significant.
It was a unique constitutional role created during this transition, specifically for rulers like him. It secured his buy-in. And as a compromise on capitals, Trivandrum, Travancore's capital, became the union capital. But Ernakulam, Cochin's capital, got the High Court and the Law College. This kept Ernakulam important and addressed Cochin's concerns. And significantly, the ruler of Cochin accepted all this without making any extra demands himself. Showed real statesmanship, arguably.
And the Tamil minority group, the Travancore Tamil Nat Congress.
VP Menon basically persuaded them to hold off on pushing the merger with Madras argument for now. He assured them their position could be protected, maybe given extra weight or representation within the new union. He called the Madras merger idea impracticable at that moment, essentially kicking that can down the road to solve the immediate integration problem.
That really shows incredible strategic thinking, doesn't it? And a real willingness to compromise on all sides just to get this union formed. It's the art of the deal, really, in a high-stakes historical moment. So that initial accession was vital. But the full merger, the creation of the actual United States, needed even more negotiation, right? VP Menon went back to Trivandrum in March 1949. What were the options then?
Right, the job wasn't finished. Menon laid out three main paths. One was forming Ainkya Kerala, the bigger linguistic state, including Malabar from Madras Presidency. The second was just a union of Travancore and Cochin. The third was simply keeping things as they were, two separate acceded states.
And Ainkya Kerala, that sounds like the logical long-term goal.
It was definitely a popular idea, the dream of a unified Malayalam-speaking region. But nationally, the whole linguistic states debate was still raging. So it was deemed premature at that specific moment. So after consulting their local Congress parties, the leaders of both Travancore and Cochin unanimously agreed to option 2, amalgamate just the two of them into a single union. And again, they explicitly opposed merging with Madras.
Okay, so the union of Travancore and Cochin it is. Now let's get into the specifics of that final merger agreement, because the details are fascinating, showing the compromises. The Raj Pramukh for life, we know about that. That was key for the Maharaja's loyalty.
Absolutely critical. Then there was the super complex issue of temple properties, especially in Travancore. The Sri Padmanabha Temple's huge properties had gotten all mixed up with state funds over the years. So the agreement specified a large annual payment, 51 lakh rupees, from the new union's general revenues straight into the Devaswam Fund. Within that, 6 lakh rupees were specifically for the Sri Padmanabha Temple itself. And this fund would be managed by a board with Hindu representatives. So financial separation and oversight.
And in Cochin, was it different?
Yes, and quite significantly. The arrangements in Cochin actually brought in what were described as far-reaching social reforms. They allowed Harijans, the community previously known as untouchables, a measure of control and access to positions within the temple administration that had always been denied to them before. A really progressive step embedded in the merger.
Wow, that's quite something to include in what's essentially a political merger document. What about the privy purses, the ruler's allowances?
They were fixed amounts. The Maharaja of Travancore got Rs 18 lakh annually. Now, this was actually less than he'd been drawing, which was Rs 27 lakh, but apparently only Rs 15 lakh of that was his official privy purse before. So still a very substantial amount.
And the Cochin Maharaja?
His was fixed at Rs 2,035,000 annually. Again, significant sums for the time, meant to guarantee their status during this huge transition. And the agreement stated that for any future successors, the amounts would be decided by the government of India. So signaling a shift towards central control eventually.
Okay. And wasn't there something about land as well?
Yes, and this is quite remarkable. The Maharaja of Travancore voluntarily gave up his extensive personal ancestral lands, the Kandu Krushi lands. We're talking about 60,000 acres, apparently yielding about 5 lakh rupees in annual revenue back then. These were distinct from state property. He signed a proclamation surrendering these lands to the new state at the exact same time he signed the merger covenant, a really significant personal gesture towards the new union.
That is a huge gesture.
It really is. And one more technical but important point.
Yeah.
The scope of accession was expanded. Unlike some earlier unions that only covered those basic 3 subjects, the Travancore-Cochin deal included a provision allowing the Raj Pramukh to agree to accession on federal taxation matters too, indicating a much deeper integration into the Indian financial system.
It's just fascinating, the level of detail and the foresight. Mixing these big political moves with social reforms and these quite personal acts of surrender. As you say, it really shows the spirit needed to build a nation out of such diverse pieces. So the covenant gets finalized, signed in May 1949. A revised instrument of accession follows in July. And then, July 1st, 1949, the United State of Travancore and Cochin officially comes into being. Covering, what was it, over 9,000 square miles, 7.5 million people, a revenue of about 134 million rupees. A significant entity.
A very significant entity. And the agreement was clear. They united their territories, one common executive, legislature, judiciary. All the assets, all the debts became those of the new United States. But crucially, the Raj Pramukh and his ministers were explicitly placed under the control of the government of India. Delhi even had the power to take over the administration in an emergency. So ultimate authority rested with the center, which, raises the fundamental question for us.
Exactly. Why should this really detailed history of just these 2 states matter to you listening today? Well, because the successful creation of this union wasn't just some local affair. It was a huge testament to the hard work, the strategy, the diplomacy of India's leaders at the time. It contributed massively to the political consolidation of the entire country. It's a powerful story about negotiation, about smart compromise, and about, sheer resilience when facing really difficult, deep-rooted problems.
Absolutely. So what does this all really mean? What's the takeaway? It's a potent reminder, I think, that building a nation isn't just about big speeches or laws passed in Parliament. It's about the painstaking work of resolving conflicts, making concessions, sometimes uncomfortable ones, and finding that common ground, even when you're dealing with centuries of rivalry and very personal feelings. It really shows that unity can emerge from even the most tangled and difficult situations. But it takes dedicated effort, it takes principled leadership, and it takes pragmatism.
Thank you for diving deep with us on that today. This whole exploration of Travancore and Cochin, it really shows how problems that seem completely intractable, steeped in history, personal issues, they can be solved. With strategic leadership, yes, but also just a willingness to find that common ground for something bigger. So here's a final thought for you to maybe chew on. How often do the kinds of personal rivalries, the geographical oddities, the resource squabbles we still see in politics today, maybe even local politics, how often do they mirror, just on a smaller scale, the huge challenges faced by nation builders during pivotal moments like the one we just discussed? Makes you think, doesn't it?